I thank my colleagues for their participation, their leadership on this issue. These jobs in the entertainment industry are enormously important to California and the rest of the country. We want to make sure they stay here. Too much of this work is going overseas, and it's leaving lots and lots of workers unemployed or underemployed. And while most people around the country think of the industry and think of the stars, most of the people that work in the industry are just trying to get by. They're the set designers, they're the carpenters, they're the lighting crew, they're the grips, they're the assistants, and these are the people who make that magic happen. We want to keep those jobs here, and many of us are deeply concerned about what this potential merger will do to those jobs. With past studio mergers, we've seen significant layoffs, and we don't want to see another wave of layoffs in the industry. We're also deeply concerned about media consolidation, viewpoint consolidation, and the effort to essentially curry favor with the FCC or the Justice Department in a merger proposal by promising to change the news content to be that more favorable to the president. That kind of thing should never be a consideration in a merger. We should not use the power of the Justice Department or the federal government to try to shape coverage around the likes or dislikes of the President of the United States. So this is a deep concern for us as well. And I think the witnesses today did a wonderful job of fleshing out those issues for us. So with that, we're happy to respond to any questions.
What, if anything, can be done?
Well, there's a lot that can be done. I think first it starts with doing oversight of the issue. And we talked about really three different kinds of issues today. One is the necessity of having a federal tax credit to compete with other countries. That should be a no-brainer. We heard, I think, very powerful testimony from Noah Wyle about his show, The Pit, and how many jobs that produces and how the tax incentive really pencils out for the state of California. For an $11 million investment, you get $100 million direct expenditure. That reverberates through the economy and produces even more economic output. We also focus, though, on the potential for the merger to eliminate many jobs in the industry, as we've seen in other mergers, but also how this could affect the editorial opinion and news coverage at CBS and CNN. But we ought to do a lot more oversight of this issue in the Congress. This particular Congress has been very negligent when it comes to oversight and asking tough questions. We need to do a lot more of this and see what kind of commitments we can get from these studios and how we can enforce them. But we need our Congress as well as administration to do their jobs and not simply bless a merger because the president intervenes in an inappropriate way.
Coincidentally, CBS laying off 6% announced it as a matter of in shutting down CBS radio altogether. Just any thoughts on that? I know some photographers at CBS who just texted me that they got the notice today they're getting laid off.
Well, let me comment on that and then invite my colleagues to do the same. It's terrible news, and we're seeing this really throughout the media. The Washington Post with its serious layoffs very recently, and it's been a cascading set of layoffs through the industry, but how are we to expect that if CNN is acquired by the same parent, that we won't see another round of layoffs and even more layoffs if there's some kind of a merger between those news entities? And the jobs are hugely important, but also we are literally laying off the independence of the media. We are seeing the federal government exercise a level of censorship that we've never experienced in this country. And that is a grave concern. I invite my colleagues to share their thoughts as well.
Just as someone who's worked in the film industry for 20 years, we have seen constant rounds of corporate consolidation over the years. We've seen sometimes a lack of enforcement of our antitrust laws in this country, sometimes a weakening of those laws by Congress over the years. And every single time you could point to a bad effect for workers and a bad effect for consumers. Do you want one grocery store in your area or do you want 7? And what does that mean for prices when you go to purchase products? We've seen this in the hospital industry, in the grocery industry, and in the media industry. It's led to jobs. So, of course, people in LA are really concerned about what this merger means. Two of the main legacy studios now merging together, with the buyer talking about efficiencies, which we know means layoffs. So we should all be really concerned about this, and we should be concerned about what it ultimately means for consumers when you go to stream a show, and how is it. And right now is the time to do oversight, like we're doing today, and to extract real commitments from the purchasers about their willingness to retain jobs right here in Los Angeles.
Could any of you speak to the specific status of any federal tax incentive legislation? And is there a specific proposal? And are any Republicans, maybe from places like Georgia, on board to work with you to try to get this through?
Yes, we've largely fleshed out the federal legislation, and we are working to make it bipartisan, to incorporate the suggestions, the thoughts of our colleagues across the aisle. This really both should be bipartisan and needs to be bipartisan. There was a chance of this being included in the big, beautiful bill, as the president calls it. Had it been included, it would have probably been the best thing in that bill. But I think there is interest also in the White House in having this industry come back to America. The president has himself voiced support for potential tariffs or a different kind of a financing regime. And I think the industry thinks it makes sense to have simply a tax credit the way other countries and the way the state of California does. But I think there's great interest in this. We do expect it to be bipartisan. It has to be, and I think we're making a lot of progress in that respect.
And are there other countries that, like, because some of the other countries have really generous tax credit, that you're kind of maybe looking at sort of like a way to model as a way to compete with them?
We're certainly considering what other countries are offering to make sure we're competitive. Now, what we have in mind is something that would be cumulative with the state tax credits. So we hope that the cumulative effect will approximate what you can do overseas. It doesn't have to be exactly equivalent. People want to produce here. They want to stay in the United States. They want to spend time with their family in the United States. But it has to be competitive. And I think, as Matt Loeb, president of the IATSE, said, at the end of the day, it comes down to dollars and cents. It either pencils out or it doesn't. And we want to make sure that we are competitive and we have a fighting chance to do production here again.
We do actually know that there are Republican members that are interested in this. And there are many red states that have doubled down on investment, on infrastructure investment, to support a burgeoning movie entertainment industry, and then have seen those dollars, those jobs, go across the water to other countries that are very interested in keeping them. But at the end of the day, this is about jobs. And we are deeply concerned about mergers like this, because generally what happens is you buy and you gut rather than buy and build. And we are trying to do all we can on the build side, build more jobs, build more economic sustainability, build more economic potential and revenue for cities like Los Angeles, states like California, and states across the country that are equally invested in protecting culture. I think a national asset, and one of the biggest assets that we have to offer.
If I can talk a little bit about jobs,
Luke, come on.
I'm a member of the Antitrust Subcommittee on Judiciary, and I've asked the same question. Will mergers, how will that affect jobs? And every answer I've gotten is, you're going to lose jobs. The Department of Justice has to take that into account when they bless these mergers. And what you just told us, sir, about these jobs being lost, this is essentially secret. Most people out there on Main Street don't know that. And we got to make sure that people at DOJ know that we know that their actions are going to have consequences, and that we're not going to stand for it. That's why we're going to start changing the narrative. This is not good for us on Main Street.
Has this reached a crisis level?
Well, I absolutely think this is a crisis. When you consider what kind of production we were doing in California, the United States, just a few years ago, and how much of that has fled the state and country, it is absolutely a crisis. And we want to make sure that this merger doesn't make it a bigger crisis. One of the concerns I have is that as we saw this competition between Paramount and Netflix play out, and the price of the deal go up and up and up, does that mean that if this merger goes through, that in order to make sure there are returns for those shareholders, the cuts are going to be even more savage than they would have been otherwise. That's a grave concern that I have.
And is it a crisis, if I may?
Yeah,
It's not a crisis for you yet. It's a concern. But those people that just called you and said, we've got the layoff notices, it's a crisis for them.
and I would add, if anyone expects that as a result of this merger, the cost they're paying for these streaming platforms is going to go down. That would defy both gravity and any kind of experience we've seen to date. We have time for one or two more questions.
I think it's also important to think about, here in Los Angeles, we have great colleges, community colleges and four-year universities that have great film and music departments. And you have young people coming from across the country and across the world
Yep.
to go and get educated in our schools and universities here. And what's their future look like? And we are fighting to get more information about these mergers, to push back against this kind of consolidation and really apathy towards antitrust violation enforcement, because it is also about protecting the future jobs of an industry that has, carried this state and other states for so long.
A question about that. The California tax incentive has a structure where if you're not in Los Angeles, you're out somewhere else in California, you get an extra 5%, and that's to sort of get political support from the rest of the state. On a federal incentive, would you have to do something similar to get an extra incentive to states that don't have an industry currently in order to get support for something that otherwise would disproportionately benefit California or New York?
We're considering a variety of facets that can be moved up or down in terms of what kind of incentives for independent productions, what kind of incentives for communities that don't have much of a film industry, but most particularly incentives to bring production back to the United States. And that's something that California has, by analogy, that if you bring production that lets the state back, you get an added increment. We're looking at that at the federal level also to try to win back that production that's gone overseas. And as President Loeb was saying, some of those production companies have entered into longer-term contracts, and this might be necessary to have an added tax credit to bring that production back here.
Ellison was previously invited to testify and declined. Has there been a new invitation for him, and how has he responded?
We did invite him to testify today, but they declined. Thank you much, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone.